As Jesus walked along, he saw a man blind from birth. His disciples asked him, "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" Jesus answered, "Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works might be revealed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." When he had said this, he spat on the ground and made mud with the saliva and spread the mud on the man's eyes, saying to him, "Go, wash in the pool of Siloam," which means sent. Then he went and washed and came back able to see. The neighbors and those who had seen him before as a beggar began to ask, "Is this not the man who used to sit and beg?" Some were saying, "It is he." Others were saying, "No, but it is someone like him." He kept saying, "I am the man." But they kept asking him, "How then were your eyes opened?" He answered, "The man called Jesus made mud, spread it on my eyes, and said to me, 'Go to Siloam and wash.' Then I went and washed, and I received my sight." They said to him, "Where is he?" He said, "I do not know." They brought to the Pharisees the man who had formerly been blind. Now it was a Sabbath day when Jesus made the mud and opened his eyes. Then the Pharisees also began to ask him how he had received his sight. He said to them, "He put mud on my eyes, then I washed, and now I see." Some of the Pharisees said, "This man is not from God, for he does not observe the Sabbath." But others said, "How can a man who is a sinner perform such signs?" And they were divided. So they again said to the blind man, "What do you say about him? It was your eyes he opened." He said, "He is a prophet." The Jews did not believe that he had been blind and received his sight until they called the parents of the man who had received his sight and asked them, "Is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see?" His parents answered, "We know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but we do not know how it is that he now sees, nor do we know who opened his eyes. Ask him, he is of age. He will speak for himself." His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that anyone who confessed Jesus to be the Messiah would be put out of the synagogue. Therefore his parents said, "He is of age, ask him." So for the second time they called the man who had been blind, and they said to him, "Give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner." He answered, "I do not know whether he is a sinner. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see." They said to him, "What did he do to you? How did he open your eyes?" He answered them, "I have told you already, and you would not listen. Why do you want to hear it again? Do you also want to become his disciples?" Then they reviled him, saying, "You are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he comes from." The man answered, "Here is an astonishing thing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but he does listen to one who worships him and obeys his will. Never since the world began has it been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing." They answered him, "You were born entirely in sins, and are you trying to teach us?" And they drove him out. Jesus heard that they had driven him out, and when he found him, he said, "Do you believe in the Son of Man?" He answered, "And who is he, sir? Tell me so that I may believe in him." Jesus said to him, "You have seen him, and the one speaking with you is he." He said, "Lord, I believe," and he worshipped him. Jesus said, "I came into this world for judgment, so that those who do not see may see, and those who do see may become blind." Some of the Pharisees near him heard this and said to him, "Surely we are not blind, are we?" Jesus said to them, "If you were blind, you would not have sin. But now that you say, 'We see,' your sin remains." The Gospel of the Lord. So, it feels to me like there's been a lot more bad stuff happening lately. Bad stuff is happening in our world, in our country, and in the personal lives of many of us. And at times like this, even if we don't say these things out loud, it's often common to ask ourselves questions like, why is this happening? How could this have been prevented? And sometimes, whose fault is it? Many of those questions are important, and many defy easy answers. Indeed, for some of them, there is no good answer. But often, these questions can get in the way. They get in the way of doing what needs to be done right now. They get in the way of looking for the path forward, and they get in the way of focusing on the needs of neighbors who have been hurt by all the bad stuff. And this is actually what's happening in today's gospel reading. Jesus and his disciples are walking around Jerusalem when they come upon a man who was born blind. He's apparently hanging out in a public place in Jerusalem where he hopes that he'll find some help. And without prompting, the disciples began to ask Jesus the very same questions that many of us ask in our hearts. Rabbi, they ask, why has this happened? Whose fault is it? Is it his parents' fault? Is it his fault? And underlying those questions is the notion that somehow there must be cause and effect in play here. After all, if things just randomly happen, I have no control over them and I can't prevent them. But if I can figure out whose fault it is and what they did wrong, at least I have a fighting chance of having this not happen to me. But Jesus doesn't answer any of those questions. He rejects the idea that anybody is to blame for this, and he does not explain how the randomness of God's creation can allow this to happen. Instead, he directs his disciples away from those questions and towards what they need to do because they see something like this happening, because they have experienced darkness. Jesus literally says, and this is slightly different from the way the New RSV translation that I just read says, but in the Greek, what it actually says is, Jesus says, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but in order that God's works may be revealed in him, we must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. That is, God did not make this guy blind so that Jesus would come along years later and heal him. Instead, Jesus tells him that because this man is blind, they should focus on the works of light. They should focus on the works of light that God can do through them instead of just debating the causes of darkness, because that's what they're doing. They should focus on the needs of the person instead of just trying to protect themselves, which is inherently what they're doing by asking these questions about, well, who was it? What did they do wrong so that I know that I won't fall under the same circumstances? And they should focus on being in community with those who sit in darkness instead of standing outside and analyzing the problem. Because it appears that this is what the disciples are doing. They are standing there talking about this blind man. You know, the guy is blind. He can't see, but he can hear. And they're standing there in front of him talking about him as though he can't hear either. He's an object. He's not somebody in community with them. Only Jesus addresses the man, talks to him, and touches him as a sign of community and solidarity with him. That is the work of light. And as the story progresses, lots of other people can't see or appreciate the works of light that Jesus does because they are still hung up on the questions and causes of darkness. So, for example, the neighbors cannot agree on whether this was the man who used to sit and beg because they have never experienced anybody having received their sight after being born blind. And since they couldn't figure out the causes of darkness, that is why he was blind, or how it happened, they continue to debate, also initially in front of him as though he can't hear them, whether he actually is the same guy. They talk about the guy, but they can't see or participate in the works of light. And then there are the parents. They are really, really worried about themselves and whether they'll get kicked out of their community if they are too closely affiliated with Jesus. By the time that this story is written down, Jewish communities actually are throwing out people among them who said Jesus is the Messiah. And it's important to read John's Gospel and understand that this is an interfamily fight. This is not Gentiles versus Jews. This is an interfamily squabble. And the parents are worried that they're going to be kicked out. And so instead of rejoicing that their son can see, they drop back and punt, saying, well, we know this is our son, and he was born blind, but, you know, he's a legally liable adult. Ask him. Even the parents are more worried about themselves and the darkness that could envelop them than they are in the light that has come upon their son. And then there are the Pharisees. Most of them, at least, because they are divided, but most of the Pharisees cannot accept that this can be a work of light because Jesus didn't work in a way that works of light are supposed to happen. You don't work on the Sabbath. And both making mud and healing were considered by the Pharisees to be working on the Sabbath, so you didn't do it the right way, and therefore it can't be a work of light. And because they couldn't see a work of light happening in a different way, they couldn't see it. Now, honestly, questions about good and evil, light and darkness, and causes and effect are important questions. They stem from a variety of real and often raw emotions, and we can learn a lot and sometimes make the world a better place by asking questions, by seeking answers, and in some cases, by holding people accountable for the things they've done. But especially when times are bad and when there's a lot of bad stuff going on around us, Jesus calls us to be people who focus on works of light. That is, what are we going to do, both individually and as a community, when faced with darkness? How are our words and deeds and attitudes towards others going to show God's presence and love right now? What do our works of light look like? It's actually instructive that the work of light done by Jesus in today's gospel came through ordinary mud. Actually, it's not even ordinary mud. He spit on the ground, he made mud. This is the grossest healing story ever, anywhere in the Gospels. But it's nothing, this mud made with spit is nothing like magical. Nobody's like, ooh, wow, here's a special amulet that's, this is regular stuff. It just looks like mud. And it's through that mud that works of light happened. And so maybe our works of light are pretty simple and non-flashy things as well. Maybe even things that look like mud in the life of the world around us. But sometimes the work of light comes through the act of focusing on hope and promises from God instead of dwelling on the latest outrage in the news. And sometimes simply immersing yourself in prayer and worship is a way of remembering and reorienting yourself towards God in a way that helps you remember that the bad stuff going on is not all there is not going to have the final word, and that the bad stuff itself is not God. There are a bunch of people that, say, like, why do you go to church? That seems like mud. It seems worthless. All you're doing is standing there singing praise to God. But it is a way of reorienting ourselves and reminding ourselves that there is more in our lives that is going to last than all the bad stuff that's going on around us. And that is a work of light, even if it looks like mud to other people. Sometimes a work of light is helping somebody who's in need, who's been hurt by all the bad stuff going on, even if it's as simple as helping people who do not have work to have a meal, or have something regular and ordinary that doesn't look like it's flashy. I said to the kids during the children's sermon a couple of weeks ago when we started the Lenten sharing bags, we are collecting really exciting things for Stepping Stone Shelter. We're getting Lysol wipes, we're getting laundry pods, we're getting all this fancy, it doesn't look like, nobody's sitting around there going, wow, that's really cool stuff you're collecting, but it's what people need. And people who have what they need, whether it's sight for a blind man or stuff that folks need when they're going into new housing, that stuff is light to them. And when we provide it, it's doing a work of light, even though it may kind of look muddy to other people. And sometimes the work of light that we do is standing with somebody in a difficult moment, even and maybe especially when there is nothing tangible that we can do to change the situation. Because often being there for someone else is a way you bring light into a dark time. Lots of us have known that in our own lives when somebody has stood with us. Sometimes we've known that when we've stood with somebody and went, I want to change the situation for you, and the person says, yeah, but you're here with me, and that makes a difference. This is the one thing that the disciples should have been doing with the blind man, right? They should have been saying, how can we help you? What can we do? Even if we can't change it, we're here with you, and they didn't. Sometimes that is a work of light for us, to simply be with people and sit with them when they're having a rough time. Those are the things that Jesus calls us to do in order to do works of light And we should actually be doing these things, whether things seem good in our world or whether things seem bad. But especially when things seem bad around us, we should do them because they help us to focus on the light instead of becoming obsessed with the darkness. And we should do them not simply because they're good things, but because they're the ways that we open ourselves to being instruments of God's light in the lives of others and in the life of the world around us.